People used to get arrested for things so harmless you'd assume the lawmaker was bored, drunk, or both. Entire governments once panicked over behavior that wouldn't raise an eyebrow today. And trust me, those were just the warm-up acts. 1. Let's start with medieval England, where lawmakers apparently woke up every morning and asked, "How can we embarrass ourselves today?" One gem from the 1400s made it illegal to wear shoes with points longer than 2 inches. That's right, shoe size wasn't the issue. It was the weaponized toe extension. Men strutted around in absurdly long shoes like they were trying to kick someone from 3 counties over, and the government finally stepped in. Not because it looked ridiculous, but because the points were disrupting church services. Imagine praying next to someone whose footwear could accidentally baptize the person 2 rows up. The law wasn't about fashion, it was crowd control. And honestly, I respect the church for saying, "Enough with the clown spears, Harold. Sit like a normal human." 2. In ancient Rome, it was once illegal for women to cry excessively at funerals, because the Senate decided grief should have limits. Professional mourners who wailed dramatically were banned, meaning Roman lawmakers took time out of their empire-building schedule to regulate volume levels at funerals. That's right. Sorry your husband died, Lucia, but keep it down. The Republic has a headache. Meanwhile, emperors were literally being poisoned at the dinner table. But sure, the real threat was women crying too loudly. If noise pollution was such a concern, maybe they should have outlawed political backstabbing instead. 3. In 17th century Russia, Peter the Great passed a law taxing men for having beards, because apparently the most pressing national crisis was facial hair. Men who didn't want to shave had to carry tiny metal beard tokens proving they'd paid the tax, like a furry license plate for their jaw. Imagine being stopped by an officer who asks, "Beard papers, please." Meanwhile, Peter himself had a magnificent beard. But don't worry, he exempted himself. Nothing screams leadership quite like outlawing the thing you personally refuse to stop doing. 4. In medieval France, it was illegal for bakers to take a day off. No vacations, no weekends, no "sorry, I overslept." If you baked bread, the government treated you like a hostage with flour. The reasoning? Bread shortages caused riots. The solution? Enslave the bakers. Genius. It's the same logic as saying, people like water. Better outlaw plumbers taking naps. Honestly, I'd riot over bad croissants too, but maybe, stay with me, the answer wasn't chaining Pierre to his oven until he died crispy and overworked. 5. In 1800s England, there was a law forbidding people from operating horses in a furious manner. Yes, the government had to officially declare that riding your horse, like an unhinged NASCAR driver, was frowned upon. And if you think this was about safety, think again. The law mostly punished people who galloped past rich folks' houses and disrupted their peace. So it wasn't "don't endanger pedestrians." It was "don't upset Lord Snobby's afternoon tea with your chaotic horse energy." Britain, always prioritizing the elite's noise levels since forever. 6. Speaking of snobby priorities, Switzerland once banned men from peeing standing up after 10 p.m. in certain buildings, because the sound of a nighttime splash was considered a public disturbance. Imagine being a grown man, sneaking into your own bathroom like a burglar, lowering the toilet seat in slow motion, because the building has a curfew for peeing technique. The government apparently didn't trust men to aim quietly, which, to be fair, history supports. But still, regulating posture? That's bold. 7. In ancient China, some dynasties banned commoners from wearing yellow, because yellow was reserved for the emperor. Imagine outlawing a color because you want to be the only one who looks good in it. Wear the wrong outfit, accidentally match the emperor's vibe, and congratulations, you've committed fashion treason. Picture a guard running up, screaming, "Sir, take off the robe, it's too sunny." Honestly, I'm shocked the emperor didn't also outlaw looking directly at him or breathing too confidently within 5 feet. 8. Victorian England had a law banning the use of trick mirrors, because people were using them to make their waists look smaller. The government was terrified women were deceiving men into marriage through strategic reflections. This was the original version of "no filters" enforced by the crown. Meanwhile, men in that era were wearing wigs so big they could hide a small rodent inside. But yeah, the mirrors were the deception problem. 9. In medieval Germany, a town once banned men from wearing pants that were too tight because they caused public indecency. Basically, the Middle Ages saw skinny jeans and said, "Absolutely not." The official worry was that tight hose left too little to the imagination. Meanwhile, these same towns allowed torture devices that would make Saw look like a spa day. But God forbid Hans's pants reveal an ankle or two. Society's priorities have always been flawless. 10. In colonial America, it was illegal to celebrate Christmas in parts of New England because the Puritans considered it a sinful excuse for fun. They literally banned joy. Imagine a government so allergic to happiness that decorating a tree could turn you into a criminal. They believed Christmas encouraged frivolity, which, frankly, was the whole point. These people saw carolers and thought, yes, lock them up. They harmonized without a permit. 11. In medieval Italy, some cities banned women from wearing pearls unless they were from noble families. Not because pearls were rare, but because rich people didn't want anyone else looking fancy. Imagine being fined because your earrings made a duchess feel insecure. It's like the city council passed a law saying, only those with generational wealth can sparkle. Poor people must remain visually dull. 12. In 16th century England, it was illegal to eat mince pies on Christmas Day. Yes, first they outlawed fun, then they outlawed dessert. The official reason was that mince pies were associated with pagan rituals. The unofficial reason? The government enjoyed ruining everything. Imagine being arrested for enjoying baked goods. Meanwhile, the same lawmakers were fully okay with public executions. But pies? Too far. 13. In ancient Greece, philosophers once pushed for a law banning men under 30 from attending drinking parties because they believed young men couldn't be trusted with both alcohol and opinions. Probably fair. But still hilarious that the great thinkers of history basically said, young dudes are too loud and dumb for wine. Come back after you've grown a beard and stopped shouting. 14. In 1800s France, there was a law requiring widows to wait 10 months before remarrying, but widowers could marry again immediately. Apparently, men were expected to bounce back like they accidentally misplaced a sock, while women needed nearly a year-long emotional quarantine. The official reasoning was paternity clarity, but the double standard was so huge it could have been its own landmark. Imagine a society saying, ma'am, we need you to mourn more responsibly. 15. And finally, in medieval England, it was illegal for commoners to play tennis. Not because it was dangerous, but because the nobles wanted to keep the sport exclusive. Picture a guard sprinting up to someone yelling, "Drop the racket, you're wearing peasant shoes." Meanwhile, nobles were getting drunk and jousting with the enthusiasm of YouTubers attempting viral stunts. But tennis? Absolutely not. Too rowdy, too common, too threatening to the fragile egos of men in tights. 16. In medieval Venice, the government once passed a law forbidding women from wearing excessively tall platform shoes because apparently half the city was walking around on 8-inch stilts like Renaissance supermodels with a death wish. These shoes, called chopinis, were so tall some women needed assistance just to walk down the street, which sounds less like fashion and more like a workers' comp claim waiting to happen. The law wasn't about safety, of course. Nothing in medieval law ever was. It was about stopping women from appearing too elevated in status. Translation: the nobles panicked because regular citizens were suddenly taller than them. Imagine being a duke trying to assert dominance, but the baker's wife strolls by on shoe skyscrapers and blocks out the sun. Naturally, the government had to intervene. Can't let the peasants literally rise above their station. 17. In 18th century France, there was a law requiring gravediggers to work only during daytime because nighttime burials were considered improper, as if the corpses would get offended by the lighting. Meanwhile, this was the same era when surgeons operated with zero anesthesia and half the population bathed annually. But sure, let's regulate shovel schedules. What kills me is the reasoning. Nighttime burials were too spooky for public order. Imagine lawmakers trembling in their powdered wigs whispering, "The citizens might get scared if Gerald buries someone after sunset." Honestly, if your society is that terrified of a guy with a shovel, maybe the problem isn't the gravediggers, maybe it's the fact that your entire city looks like the set of a gothic horror film. 18. In ancient Babylon, there was a law stating that if a builder constructed a house and it collapsed, killing the owner, the builder would be executed. If the owner's son died, then, you guessed it, the builder's son would be executed. This wasn't justice. It was a medieval attempt at Groupon-style family matching. The logic is wild. My bad, your home fell down, Please accept this son as compensation. It's like Hammurabi invented the world's worst customer service policy. Imagine being a contractor back then. Every time you hammered a nail, you were basically wagering your child's future. No wonder ancient buildings weighed 9 tons and were made of stone thick enough to survive a small meteor strike. If my life depended on my drywall not crumbling, trust me, it'd be load-bearing enough to support a herd of elephants. 19. In 16th century Scotland, there was a law banning people from wearing excessively lavish sleeves. Yes, sleeves. Apparently, some nobles were stuffing enough fabric into their outfits to build a small sailboat, and Parliament had had enough. They decided sleeves were a national threat, which tells you everything you need to know about their priorities. The country was dealing with invasions, plagues, and poverty, but the biggest issue was someone's puffy arm decor. Imagine trying to govern while the guy next to you is wearing sleeves so wide they brush your quill off the table every 5 minutes. I mean, sure, regulate the sleeves, but maybe also take a break from micromanaging fashion and focus on, I don't know, basic societal survival? 20. In ancient Greece, lawmakers once banned citizens from throwing apple cores on public roads because it encouraged slipping and disorder. Yes, slipping and disorder. As if thousands of philosophers and warriors were out there skating around on fruit peels like ancient slapstick comedians. The best part is the moral outrage. Apple littering was seen as barbaric, almost criminally disrespectful. Meanwhile, these same people held citywide festivals where half the attendees got drunk enough to philosophize with donkeys. But sure, the apple cores were the real social collapse. Apparently, civilization rests on keeping the sidewalks free of fruit-based chaos. 21. In 19th century England, it was illegal for a man to marry his deceased wife's sister. Not his living wife's sister, his dead wife's. Meaning lawmakers actually sat down and said, we must prevent grieving widowers from marrying women they may or may not already know. The fear? Confusion in the family structure. Right. Because nothing stabilizes grief like government-timed loneliness. These were the same people who had no problem with child labor in coal mines, but marrying your dead wife's sister? Absolutely immoral. They eventually repealed it, but only after a national debate so dramatic you'd think they were deciding the fate of the planet instead of two consenting adults who happened to share in-laws. 22. In ancient Egypt, there was a law requiring every citizen to explain how they earned their income. And if the explanation wasn't good enough, the state could punish you. Imagine living in a society where saying freelance work wasn't vague, it was illegal. Bureaucrats basically invented the world's first tax interrogation room. The weirdest part? This rule existed in a civilization that worshipped cats, believed in magic spells, and mummified crocodiles. But your income? That had to make perfect sense. If Egypt existed today, half the internet would be in jail for suspiciously creative employment. 23. In 17th century England, lawmakers made it illegal to keep swans unless you had royal permission, because all unmarked swans belonged to the crown. That's right. The monarchy claimed ownership of an entire species like they were collecting Pokémon. You couldn't even accidentally look at a swan the wrong way without risking a fine. Imagine being a fisherman trying to mind your business while a swan swims by aggressively and legally outranks you. What a power move. We rule the land, the seas, and also these honking feathered gremlins. 24. In medieval Germany, towns sometimes passed laws banning men from feuding in the streets with swords, because apparently that was happening often enough to need legislation. Imagine being the mayor and thinking, okay, gentlemen, please stop stabbing each other outside the bakery. It's bad for business. But instead of questioning why the entire male population was reenacting Game of Thrones every Tuesday, they just wrote a rule about it. I love that this was considered a normal governance issue, like trash collection or road repair. Street sword fights made it onto someone's to-do list. 25. In ancient Athens, there was a law banning teachers from tutoring more than 3 students at once, because large groups were considered suspicious. The government feared that philosophy teachers would form secret political clubs. Meanwhile, half the city was already meeting in bathhouses, plotting everything from art to democracy. But nope, the real threat was a 4th student learning the alphabet. Imagine being that teacher, forced to say, "Sorry kid, we can't let you in." The government thinks you might overthrow the city with your reading skills. 26. In medieval England, barbers were legally allowed to perform surgery. but only certain surgeries, because apparently the government believed your haircut guy should have limited access to your internal organs. Barbers handled bloodletting, tooth extraction, and minor operations, like a one-stop shop for grooming and medieval horror. But then lawmakers had to step in when barbers started getting a little too enthusiastic with their medical side hustle. Imagine sitting in the barber chair and hearing, "While I'm trimming your beard, want me to fix that hernia?" No wonder infection was basically a national pastime. 27. In early America, several colonies passed laws banning excessive kissing in public. Not regular kissing, that was tolerated, but excessive, which was never defined. Meaning any random passerby could decide you loved your partner a little too passionately and summon the authorities. Great system. Imagine getting fined because your goodbye kiss lasted 3 seconds too long for someone's delicate 1600 sensibilities. These were people who literally whipped each other for minor sins, but a prolonged smooch, that's where they drew the moral line. 28. In medieval Norway, there was a law stating that if you killed someone, the victim's family could choose to either execute you or just fine you, as if murder was something you could settle with a coupon. The state basically invented a loyalty program for crime. Imagine standing in court while the judge says, "The family has decided on the deluxe compensation package." Suddenly, crime becomes an economic transaction. Honestly, I can't tell if this was barbaric or just early capitalism. 29. And finally, in Renaissance Italy, there was a law banning people from spreading false prophecies because fortune tellers were causing too much public panic. Which is hilarious considering half the nobles believed in astrology religiously. The government wanted people calm, obedient, and not hysterically convinced the moon was going to explode next Thursday. But the fortune tellers kept predicting plagues, famine, or political doom. And the authorities were like, "Stop scaring the citizens. That's our job." And just like that, the city invented the world's first ban on spoilers. And there you have it. Centuries of laws so deranged they make modern chaos look organized. Pick the dumbest one, drop it in the comments, and if you want more madness, you know what to do.